So our first semester at the Missionary Training Center, it was kickoff. We're just getting started, and there's a missionary there sharing from Papua New Guinea. And he had said that one of the biggest challenges as a missionary was the temptation to trade fellowship with the Lord for working for the Lord.
God's plan, since before He created the world, has been to include people, His creation, in a beautiful friendship with Himself.
In the context in which that friendship can flourish and we can thrive in this deepening friendship with God has always been through the opportunity of partnering with Himself.
God's mind and God's heart is about us becoming grown up and mature and useful to the purposes of His family.
The temptation was to replace actually fellowship with the Lord and spending time with Him with ministry. And that was something that really struck me when we were at the Missionary Training Center, and I've really found that to be a struggle here in Senegal.
I think the trials, much like we all think here in E2, are related to learning another language and beginning to understand another culture, and just the insecurity and the amount, the level, the number of failures in that kind of scenario. But for me personally, one of the biggest challenges for me as of late has actually been physical illness. Just to not be able to leave the house, to not be able to, I knew I should be out there talking with people and getting to make friendships, and the reality was, I didn't have the strength to do it, didn't have the health to do it. It was like my immune system had just collapsed. And I just think what was going through my mind at that time, so that kind of challenge, a lot of things rush through your mind, right? A lot of things that you're thinking about. And for me, the biggest one was just discouragement and frustration. Lord, I'm here, I'm trusting you with learning another language, understanding another culture, doing ministry in this context, and here I can't even leave my room.
For me, coming to West Africa has been so far just an incredible journey in these 7 short months, fast months. One of the biggest, most unexpected challenges that I've faced so far has just been how uncomfortable I felt and how challenging it has been to continue to put myself in uncomfortable positions.
I've had many times since we've been here in West Africa where I've felt like quitting. From us being sick, super fatigued because our kids aren't sleeping, where I went to class, sat down in class, and I thought to myself, why am I here? Super tired, trying to process through this new language, and not only process through the new language, but the new relationships that language has given me an opportunity to move towards. And often because of comparison, because of insecurity, I felt like saying, all right, let's go home, Martha.
As my mind goes on autopilot, I notice that it automatically goes to, how can we get more involved in our church? What should we be doing with our host family? How many hours I've been listening to my language recordings, and how close I am to the next phase of language, or even how to help my daughter adjust better to the culture here. And I find that those things really drive what I'm thinking about, what I'm focused on.
Paul makes an interesting remark. He talks about how in his weakness, God's strength was seen, in essence. God's power was displayed in his weakness. A passage we know often, but until we're struggling with physical things or mental things, discouragement, it's hard to keep that at the forefront of our minds. And I think God has been teaching me that in French study, I want to go to competition. I want to be able to have something to brag about.
It's such an incredible paradox that God would choose to use as the conduits of the most important message in the world such weak vessels, and yet God delights in using weakness. And as we are willing to acknowledge our weakness, we become usable to Him for His purposes.
God is able and more than willing to sustain His children in friendship with Himself to accomplish His task of seeing those who have never heard to get a chance to hear.
The most important thing is a focus on Him, the one who's actually going to sustain me through this ministry, the one that is the reason I'm here. So for me, that's been the biggest challenge and the biggest conviction is just where is my mind going naturally and how can I intentionally focus more on the giver of life, the giver of peace, than all the things, all the tasks that needs to be done.